what should be job one for Congress right now?
Right. Well, I think job one for Congress is one, tone down the rhetoric, talk a lot about the peaceful transition of power, talk a lot about how Joe Biden's our legitimate president, and then get to work in this next term and doing the things America needs. Listen, we had a very bad period in this country from the late 1960s to the early 1980s. Multiple recessions, stagflation, civil unrest. The market went nowhere on an inflation-adjusted basis. The market was down by quite a bit. And then we had an economic boom in this country starting in 1983. And it didn't take long, really 3-4 years. Americans felt different about this country. The world felt different about America. I hope that's what we have coming up now, is that we have a post-pandemic rebound and then a longer economic boom. I know Goldman Sachs has just raised their forecast for next year at over 6%. We could use a lot more of those kinds of years going forward. If there's a roaring 20s here, I think that helps really solve a lot of problems.
And I want to follow up with you again, Jimmy, before we go to Jeff here, because, again, not to be a Pollyanna about it, but to your point, if you do study history, as I know you do, we can look back and see many, many times in this nation's history where we have seemed like we're on the breaking point only to rally through it. You know, and people fear, and this is an economic question as well, oh, we now have single-party rule, House, Senate, White House. And I know it seems hard to believe, but there's only been, I went through the numbers last night, I believe 20 times in American, out of 117 Congresses, where we have had split houses. Single-party rule is actually the norm. I know the last 20 years, we've had this back and forth, but through American history, the 30s, the 60s, the 1850s, whatever it may be, it was single-party rule. So we know how to do this, and maybe, just maybe, the narrowest majority in Congress in 100 years, which is what we have, will come together. Do you have any optimism about that?
I kind of do. My self-admitted bias is toward optimism. But the median senators are going to be people like Joe Manchin and Mark Kelly, the two Arizona senators. So, I think that provides, a glimmer of hope that I think actual real things can happen. I think there's an understanding that we need things to happen, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's, more science investment. And I hope that's the lesson people have learned from yesterday and the past month, that we have big problems. If we don't come together, they're not going to get solved. And they're certainly not going to get solved if we don't trust each other and if we hate each other.
Yeah, what did Benjamin Franklin, I believe it was Franklin, so we can all hang together, or we may all certainly hang separately. Jeff Kilburg, from a market's perspective, I know it seems crass. We're watching these terrible scenes unfold, and yet markets are going higher. And we kind of walk through some of the ideals about that. Why? Because, correct, markets look ahead, and they're looking at better days. The pandemic will end. Vaccines on the way. The economy will improve. There are reasons for the market to be optimistic, and that's what's reflected in the price action.
You're right, Sully. And the stock market is a forward pricing mechanism. Despite the disgraceful chaos that we had to witness yesterday out of D.C., the market was able to hurdle that. It was really representative in the VIX. The VIX never got above 25. So the fear factor, the fear gauge that we like to look at, didn't really resonate or spill into the stock market. And yes, you're right. We saw a lot of buyers and hope and optimism that this infrastructure, that additional stimulus, that this additional engine in the oil for the Democrats moving forward is going to allow a lot more spending, a lot more infrastructure. And that was the real message. So I think the stock market, despite the chaos, the stock market really looked forward to what we are foreseeing. And look at clean energy. We look at the ETF PBW. Had a sensational year in 2020. It was up yet again yesterday. We talk about infrastructure plays. Look at Cleveland Cliffs. Some of these names that really hadn't seen a lot of love in the last couple of years really moved higher, and I think that's representative of what the future looks like. And that's the takeaway. The stock market isn't overlooking, isn't diminishing the disgraceful chaos that transpired. What it's looking forward to is what we can do as a country moving forward, and that's really exciting, Sully, as an investor.
Yeah, and if you need a reason to feel good, too, about it, is that the Russell 2000, which, small cap stocks that have basically 0% of their revenues done internationally, that is a domestic play, Jeff, right? Those are companies that are based in America, that mostly build their or sell their stuff in America to Americans, And that index went up nearly 5% at one point yesterday, closed just beneath that. The market is suggesting that the domestic reflation trade, the economy, whether it's that roaring 20s, which hopefully will have a better end, Jimmy, this time, that's going to happen, in 9, 12 months and in 2022. Correct, Jeff?
Well, the rotation is real. I think you bring up a great point talking about the small caps. Sensational day yesterday, up nearly 5%. But let's be mindful, ever since we saw the pandemic hit in the month of March, a lot of those smaller cap stocks got thrown away for the wrong reasons. So now that we have a light at the end of the tunnel, now that the vaccine is slowly being distributed, I think those small caps names have a reason to be owned. But I think the rotation or the diminished exposure out of technology into small caps, into some of the laggards, into some of the blue chip industrial names. I think that's more the overarching theme because the small caps, they have lagged the S&P 500, they have lagged the Dow Jones, they've lagged the NASDAQ 100 for the last 3 years, ever since 2016. So I think it's a stock picker's market. You have to be mindful and understand exactly where your exposure is moving forward. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of value out there in some of those small cap stocks.
Yeah, and Jimmy, just to wrap it up with you and sort of put a cherry on your first point there, which is that we've seen business leaders, by the way, from Jamie Dimon to Tim Cook to Sundar Pichai come out and condemn either what they saw. They condemn President Trump, Bill Ackman for that, saying that Trump should simply resign, just rattling that off on Twitter as well. Many in Congress doing the same. They just wrapped up. Many may still actually be on Capitol Hill. 3:44 a.m. is when that gavel came down on the proceedings to certify the election. What should be Congress's job one? If you are Nancy Pelosi or you are Chuck Schumer, the new majority leader, by the way, what's the first thing on your docket?
The first thing in this new term, and I don't think much is going to happen between now and the end of the year. I don't think, based on what I saw last night, I don't think we're going to get an impeachment and removal of the president. The president put out a statement saying that he accepts peaceful transition of power. I think that's to tamp down on that kind of talk. And going forward, I would look very carefully if I was Congress at what do we need going forward to boost economic growth and productivity beyond this pandemic. And I think that things like infrastructure, and as I said earlier, a lot more science investment to create the economy of the future that's going to create those good jobs and faster growth that we need, which I talked about earlier. I would like to see Congress move on that.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.